Hello and welcome everyone. I am Justina Okechukwu. This is Energy Frontiers, proudly supported each week by the African Energy Chamber. Let's get started with some energy news headlines from here in Africa and around the world. The African Export-Import Bank, in collaboration with the Africa Finance Corporation and UK's Emerging Markets Asset Manager, GEMCorp Holdings Limited, have announced the financial close of the Cabinda oil refinery in Angola with a $335 million project financing facility in partnership with Angola's state oil company, Sonangol. The first phase of the project will enable the processing of 30,000 barrels of crude oil per day and another 30,000 barrels during the second phase. Nigeria's NNPC Limited has signed a heads of terms agreement with marine logistics company UTM Offshore Limited for the construction of the country's first indigenous floating liquefied natural gas project, which is expected to help cut gas flaring, support reduction in carbon emissions, and create over 7,000 jobs in the West African oil and gas major exporter. Private Infrastructure Development Group, the Emerging Africa Infrastructure Fund, announced it has invested 35 million euros loan to develop a 46 megawatt biomass power plant in Cote d'Ivoire. The project, which is the largest of its kind in West Africa, is expected to cut 4.5 million tons of carbon emissions over its 25-year lifetime. The Angolan subsidiary of Afentra has signed a sale and purchase agreement with Azule Energy to buy a 12% and 16% stake each in two of its blocks offshore Angola for a firm consideration of $48.5 million and a deferred contingent payment of up to $36 million subject to oil price, production, and development conditions. Africa-focused independent power producer Globelec has agreed to buy a 75% stake in the 41 megawatt Mocuba solar PV plant in Mozambique from Norwegian IPP Scatec and KLP Norfund Investments at the same time. Mozambique National Power Company, EDM, will continue to hold the remaining 25%. The International Energy Agency, in its 2023 Electricity Market Report update, says it sees an increase in global electricity demand by slightly less than 2% this year, from 2.3% in 2022, but expects demand growth to rebound to 3.3% in 2024 if the world economic outlook improves. The report also finds that the world is rapidly moving towards a tipping point where global electricity generation from fossil fuels will increasingly be replaced by electricity from clean energy sources. And that was a snapshot of your energy news headlines. But there seems to be no end in sight, at least yet, to South Africa's power crisis as Eskom implements stage 4 load shedding during the blistering winter season. More on that after this break. This is Energy Frontiers. South Africa's troubled utility giant Eskom implemented stage 4 load shedding during the week and said varying stages of load shedding will be in place until Saturday evening. This comes after Eskom announced breakdowns in 8 of its generating units just 2 days after it reported an improvement to the system. Meanwhile, the President, Cyril Ramaphosa, says that an operational task team has been set up to conduct investigations into allegations of alleged sabotage, fraud, corruption, and the theft of Eskom's infrastructure. This was the focus of my interview chat with Peter Major. He's a mining investment professional and a director at Emergence Corporate Solutions based in Cape Town. Yes, Peter, a lot is going on right now in South Africa at the moment, but an 11 billion rand coal contract by Eskom was cancelled this week as the crackdown on corruption and mismanagement at the utility continues. Is there a ray of hope for Eskom?
Look, there's definitely a ray of hope because we're finally getting consensus among the public, the voting masses, and government that many of their policies have backfired terribly, that many of their policies actually promote corruption and they legalize it and they make it standard policy. And everyone living in South Africa now sees the result of those policies because we are having 8 to 10 hours of load shedding almost daily in the majority of the country. It's impacting hugely on mining and all of our industries. And government has denied it. They've made excuses. Then they've downplayed it, saying it was going to be temporary. But now there seems to be full realization and agreement. Government is admitting all these mistakes. And so this 11 billion coal cancellation, it's just the start. As you say, it's a ray, but it's this genuine ray of hope. And we just hope they follow this to its natural conclusion, which is to put in proper policies and to back those policies up with action.
So how are South Africans coping with the current winter season as Eskom's load shedding continues, but at different stages?
Almost all South Africans have been working on alternatives for a long time. A long time means more than 10 years. And obviously, private industry, they've probably made the most progress as far as sustainable alternatives because they're putting in generators, they're putting in battery and solar panel systems. But this comes at a cost. And a lot of industry can't afford it. And until very recently, legislation actually prevented industry. It even prevented private homeowners from putting in this alternative. So that's why I say we're being hit on all sides. If it was just Eskom had problems and people and industries were allowed to make alternative plans, that would still be difficult. It would still be expensive and slow, but it would help. But for decades, literally for the last 20 years, government had policies in place that prevented private industry and individuals from using a lot of alternatives. And that's why I say this is a government created problem. This didn't come out of nowhere. This came out of bad policies that in a lot of cases were designed to favor the ruling party and their friends. And once you implement a policy and make it legal, now you've legalized corruption or inefficiency or mismanagement or theft. But South Africans can only cope so much because the whole world is dependent on electricity. And when you had the best utility in the world running decade after decade, naturally you got very dependent on them. They were efficient. They were cheap. It made no sense to spend extra money, time, and effort having an alternative. So it came as a shock. Nobody on the planet could ever imagine government would want to tamper with something that works so well for all of South Africa. But they did.
But I would ask this question. I thought South Africa was ramping up on alternative energy sources such as renewables. So what is the silver lining there, Peter?
The silver lining is still pretty small. The silver lining is, yes, the whole world was going to clean energy. The shift is towards clean energy, but it takes time, it takes money, and it takes policy. And South Africa doesn't have any of those three. We don't have time because Eskom isn't even producing at 55, 60% of its design capacity. So we don't have time to dance around this. We don't have the money. Eskom has 400 billion debt. And even if government's taking on half of that, it still has 200 billion debt at high interest rates. And Eskom needs probably 400 to 800 billion to be implementing policies that will allow a lot of its production to be clean, to implement policies to clean up its dirtiest plants that are still running, to implement spending in CAPEX to just keep its newer power plants running. So we don't have the policies yet in place. We're only slowly realizing and acting upon bad policies. The government is way behind the curve on this, and they've got to speed up. And yes, we took off the cap for private industry. They can now generate all they want. But geez, you can't just take off the cap and private industry start spending the hundreds of billions needed. This cap should never have existed. You know, back 20 years ago, government had a policy that was going to promote alternative energy, and then they reneged on it. The few businesses that put it in place weren't allowed to hook up. They froze it because they thought, oh my gosh, this is taking contracts away from Eskom, and we have control over who gets the Eskom contracts. Heaven forbid we don't have control who gets these private industry contracts. So it's government's obsession with control that has led to the state that we're in now.
Peter Major, mining investment expert and director at Mergence Corporate Solutions, providing some updates on South Africa's current energy situation. But when we return, Uganda is racing against time to deliver its first oil by 2025. There is more in this package.
Imagine a future where tomorrow's solutions build a world of opportunities for all, and where human potential is truly realized, where every child has an equal chance in life, no matter where they were born. Imagine the potential of a continent built on low-carbon oil and natural gas and abundant renewable energy. Imagine Mozambique, Angola, Nigeria, Uganda, Senegal, Egypt, Namibia, and Algeria being let free to develop their natural resources without pressure from wealthy countries to leave it in the ground. Imagine an Africa where we cut red tape bureaucracy and provide better fiscal terms so we can compete globally for energy investments. African Energy Week is the African Energy Chamber's annual event held at the Cape Town waterfront, uniting African energy leaders, global investors, and executives from across the public and private sector for 4 days of intense dialogue on the future of the African energy industry. Showcasing the latest technologies and innovations to 5,000 plus registered delegates from over 100 countries and international professionals from across the global energy sector. Be part of the future of the energy industry and join the energy movement by becoming an official sponsor, exhibitor, delegate, or partner. African Energy Week.
Welcome back to the program. The Ugandan government says it is working within a time frame of less than 2 years to deliver oil in the first half of 2025. The East African country is looking to produce about 1.4 billion barrels of oil in the next 2 decades, part of which would be shipped abroad through a pipeline connecting Uganda and Tanzania. Over the next 25 years, oil is expected to earn Uganda a total of 22.88 trillion shillings annually, almost half of the current budget. However, oil projects in the country have been slowed down by stiff resistance from a number of global investors as well as environmental activist organizations. Joseph Ochieno is a political economist and international journalist based in Kampala. In this interview, I asked him what the withdrawal by global financiers from Uganda's oil and gas projects would mean for President Museveni's ambition. Let's listen. Yeah, recently the Petroleum Authority said they were trying to mobilize funding. How does the administration of President Museveni plan to mobilize financing from other sources from its hydrocarbon project?
It's going to be difficult. It's going to be tricky. He sounds very, very confident about it, but I think it's because of oil, so many people will be interested. As I hinted to you, a number of interested parties will be wanting to participate. even if the major players, particularly from the West, are now playing shy. I think while the president has talked about mobilization, perhaps a possibility of generating resources domestically, the country has a huge debt burden, and at the moment, literally struggling with being able to sustain some of its own basic domestic requirements, as basic as recently. It has been reported that the government could not support the process of local council elections, the law structures in the country. But that said, they are arguing that perhaps they're going to begin being much more prudent in terms of mobilization of domestic taxation, maybe rejiggling some of their budgetary provisions. How much is not very clear. But I think the commitment from their point of perspective is that perhaps anything else can wait, but the oil has to flow.
Now, while that is on, I can't but wonder, is it possible to mobilize domestic capital for this project, allowing Ugandans to own their own project?
I think it's really unfortunate that thus far African countries and African governments have not learned from the Norways of this world when it comes to basically mobilization of domestic resources, capitalization of many of their own projects. Recently, there have been conversations about possibility of trying to find a way in which we're able to reclaim our former indigenous Uganda Commercial Bank and many other related financial institutions that would actually help in this way. At this material time, beyond the ordinary usual bonds and treasury bonds and treasury bills, I'm not quite sure, considering Uganda's own market, I'm not quite sure how much we can claim that we're able to mobilize sufficiently domestically. I think for the moment, and considering the stage in which we are on this, very likely we are still going to be dependent. It is quite sad that for oil in Uganda, if you look, the big owners in percentage terms on this project are Total and Etal, the usual suspects from the West. And then you find Ugandan government having very small share of these monies. So for the moment, anyway, I think the government is simply saying that, well, whatever happens, whatever percentage they get, they will get. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest share of the net proceeds is going to go to external finances. And as I said, Uganda will benefit, but I'm not quite sure whether we are still independent enough in terms of our fiscal policies and programs enough to be able to guarantee a possibility of a net independence, if you like, as far as supporting this project is concerned.
Now, what is the plan of the Ugandan government to utilize the oil revenues and avoid the so-called oil costs?
I think that's a very difficult question. Nobody can tell, considering that the Ugandan authorities, the Ugandan government is one that has been in power for the last 40 years and one that came to power without the mandate of the people. And one of the most common things in Uganda is conversations about elections and mandates and election rigging, even if it's local elections. Then you know very well that if that is the background, then it's very unlikely that you're dealing with a regime that is mandated, a regime that is conscious of the basic needs of the people, a regime that is conscious of demands from the public. So that is a very blunt answer I can give you as far as this is concerned. But that said, does not mean that dictatorship don't develop. Gaddafi managed to utilize the oil revenues in Libya for the Libyans. A number of other dictatorships have done so and made sure that the economies have grown. In Uganda's case, I think, if the authorities are not possibly willing or such authorities that are not tuned to decent use of the natural resources, you expect to have an active, organized citizenry to demand for that, basically a political activism or indeed civil society. In Uganda at the moment, both are still rather weak. That said, though, I think there is an increasing awareness generally that this oil thing has been coming in for a long time. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on the Ugandan authorities to ensure that there is public accountability for most of the resources and to ensure that these resources are spent generally well. the oil curse on Africa, as for me, someone who's been an activist and someone who's been commenting and writing and actually following Africa for the last 20 or so years, I did not know that we would be talking about this kind of a topic where the issue in doubt is how we spend our oil dollars. Unfortunately, this is the reality.
And as we end the show, the African Energy Chamber is promoting diversity and inclusion in the energy industry. So the Frontline Energy Advocacy Organization is asking young women who are working towards being a part of the oil and gas or energy-related fields to apply for its new education scholarship fund. Please visit the AEC website on www.energychamber.org for more information on eligibility criteria, application processes, and deadlines. Meanwhile, you can still register and participate at the African Energy Week 2023, set to take place in Cape Town, South Africa from October 16 to 20. This week, two energy companies, Total Energies and O&O Nigeria, announced their sponsorship support for the high-profile event. And that's how we wrap up the show this week. We thank you for watching. Remember to follow the program on Frontier Africa Reports website, subscribe to our YouTube, and follow us across all our social media handles as indicated on the screen. It's goodbye from me, Justina Okechukwu. I'll see you soon.